webinar. We are going to get started now. My name is Alexis Carlin. I'm the Digital Marketing and Operations Manager for Percussion Software. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar on liberating your content for cross-channel distribution. Before we get started, I'd like to mention just a few housekeeping notes. If you would like to live tweet, the Twitter tag for today's webinar is #FreeMyContent. The slides will be emailed to you after today's presentation and available on percussion.com. And there will be time for Q&A post-webinar, so please type your questions into the chat window, and we would be happy to answer them afterwards. Before we get started, a quick word on Percussion. Percussion software is the next generation in web content management. Percussion transforms how you manage your content, making it easier than ever to accelerate your content marketing initiatives. Percussion software is used by AIDS.gov, Lancaster Bible College, Mass.gov, the Weather Channel, and Vegas.com. You can learn more about our products on percussion.com. Today's webinar will be presented by Scott Noonan, the CTO of Boston Interactive. Scott likes to keep his clients current on everything that is new. With that, take it away, Scott.
Thank you very much, Alexis, and thank you all for joining us today. As Alexis pointed out, the title of our webinar today is Free at Last, Liberating Your Content for Cross-Channel Distribution. And what we'd like to talk a little bit about is the fact that a lot of recent conversation around has been focused more on design and development challenges relative to the different types of devices and platforms and new technologies that we're seeing out there. A couple examples of that are, in the case of responsive design, a lot of talk about things like media queries and breakpoints, viewport sizes, techniques like progressive enhancement, all technical and design conversations. Relative to things like mobile apps, we're talking a lot about whether we should build native apps, whether we should use HTML5, what operating systems do we build for? How do we maintain consistent code bases across those operating systems? Technical challenges like what we should do if the device isn't online and we're consuming dynamic content. But what we're really not talking a lot about, at least as far as I'm concerned and from what I can see, is really our content. And I think it's an important discussion to have because really at the end of our day, the content is really your secret sauce. It's what differentiates you. It's really the message that you're trying to get out to your customers and what you're trying to talk about. So I think as content creators, we really need to spend a lot more time thinking about how we organize our content, regardless of the technology or the design that we're dealing with. So today, we'd like to talk a little bit more about how to manage and organize your content, how to structure it for distribution across multiple channels, including different devices as well as different mediums. This is really becoming more and more important as we look to create content that we can repurpose everywhere, not just on the web, but also print and other channels as well. Before we get started, just a few things about me. As Alexa said, my name is Scott Noonan. I am the Chief Technology Officer at Boston Interactive, and I've been in that role since 2001. With that, I have 30-plus years of software development experience, and in the last 15-plus years, I've been in the web content management system space. Being in that space has really put me in a unique position to see a lot of changes come across technologically in the last several years, as well as really be inspired to look forward as to what's coming down the road. So to start off, I'd like to talk a little bit about content production and how it's done today. Typically, when we're producing content, we really produce it while thinking of the final medium in which it's going to end up. Some of these mediums include, for example, print, our own website or other websites that might be consuming that content, mobile. This includes mobile web as well as mobile apps. Oftentimes we find ourselves producing content for things like kiosks or standalone displays, news feeds, other consumption platforms, aggregators, things of that nature, digital billboards, and even for television. And because of this, we have a tendency to write our content with the delivery context in mind. And the result of this is we can quite easily end up with multiple versions of the same content living in a lot of different places. If we add to this the fact that our content typically ends up being managed by multiple systems, this really can create a difficult environment in terms of us getting a consistent message across to our end users. Doing things this way, the way we're doing them today, inherently creates a few problems. First, in my opinion, it becomes very difficult to maintain our content because we have different versions of that and different versions of our message, quite frankly, depending on where it's going to end up. Secondly, it doesn't really put our content into a good position of being what I call future ready or very flexible. It's basically restricted to the medium that we're considering at the time of writing. So when we're writing something for print, we're really only thinking about what that content is going to look like in that final print piece. The third problem is that our content typically ends up being managed by multiple systems, and in some cases no systems at all. And this ultimately creates a very difficult environment for maintaining our content and keeping consistency with that messaging. And finally, we're writing our content specific to the endpoint. As I mentioned earlier, if we're writing for something for a print piece, we tend to think only about that piece. And the problem with that is that when a new channel comes around or something new comes along, we essentially find ourselves rewriting or remanaging that content specific for that new outlet. And really, with today's technology changing as rapidly as it does, in my opinion, we really need to stop thinking about writing our content with that endpoint in mind. Instead, what we need to be doing is thinking about creating our content and finding a way to manage it so that it can be distributed anywhere and maintaining one source of content. We tend to think about what we know today, which are things like websites or mobile apps, etc. But really, the things we need to start thinking about are things that don't even necessarily exist yet, or things that we haven't thought of. And with that, I think it's imperative that we ask ourselves, what these future interfaces or these platforms are going to look like. How might our content be displayed a month from now, or a year from now, or 2 years from now? So I'd like to sort of lead this off by just showing you a quick video. And I'm sure many of you are going to recognize this. So now, for those of you who didn't recognize that clip, that was from the movie Iron Man, starring Robert Downey Jr. And when you see that movie, as when I saw it, it seemed really cool. There was some really cool sort of futuristic sci-fi interfaces going on. And in reality, when we see those types of things in the movies, we think that's really neat and it's great for theater, but it's fairly unrealistic. It's not something that we really envision having at our fingertips anytime soon. So with that, I want to show you another video, and this one is an excerpt from a clip that was put out recently by Corning Glass, and this involves some of the things that they are currently working on today.
This is Amy's room. She's not quite awake yet. And this is her tablet. These will be as commonplace as the mobile phone is today. Uh-oh. Looks like her alarm's about to go off. Amy's tablet captures, organizes, and displays all her favorite things. It also helps her at school and manages her schedule. It's encased entirely in an incredibly thin, lightweight, highly durable glass with specialized optics. Her bedroom window is electrochromic. It changes state from opaque to transparent on demand. Now, I'm not sure if you noticed, but this closet door is actually a display driven by Amy's tablet. All the intelligence that you see on this display, all these apps, they're all residing and running on Amy's tablet. This display spans the entire door. It has its own small footprint operating system and is smart enough to be aware of Amy's device. And based upon proximity and other rules, it knows what to display and in what format. To make this part of Amy's Day a reality, Corning is helping to deliver large-scale, edge-to-edge displays. Corning looks to partners for operating systems and apps that seamlessly scale and transfer between tablets and larger displays. Beautiful, isn't it? All that logic encased in low-profile, thin, resilient, touch-sensitive glass. I know what you're thinking. Why would one want an all-glass room? Well, for starters, these walls could be active displays and configured for different situations, depending on the required purpose of the room. Here, Dan is in a video conference and the entire glass wall has become the display. Edge-to-edge, seamless, and touch-sensitive. It's as if the remote location were now part of his room, making it easier to share and collaborate. Now that's breaking down barriers. This is really going to change the way we work.
Now, I don't know about you guys, but I saw that the first time, and I've seen it many times since, and that's just some really amazingly cool stuff. And you know, the point, more so than it just being really cool, the point being is that the future really isn't that far off anymore. It's not as far-fetched as it might have once seemed. I mean, these are things that real companies, real solutions that real companies are working on right now, and some of these are actually available today. And it's not just Corning. There are companies like Panasonic doing some unbelievable things with glass display. Google has, Google Glasses. A lot of these new interfaces are coming up now that are really very compelling. There are some companies out there right now that are working on tablets with expandable displays. So if you can imagine your iPad being able to expand to a larger display at your will. Certain devices with sensors in them that can be combined. So, for example, putting two tablets together to create a larger display or to share information. Motorola is working on some really great flexible displays, as well as Nokia is doing the same thing. Curved displays for our car dashboards. There's a lot happening in the terms of interface design and technology right now. And basically, if you can think of it, somebody out there is probably actually working on it. So, when we look at this, we have to ask ourselves, what does this mean to us as content producers? Well, as I said before, the first time I saw this video, my first thought was, wow, this is really awesome. I can't wait for this to be in my own house. And then, of course, my second thought was pure fear at that point, because the thing that came to my mind was, well, what does this mean for the future of interfaces and how we control content being viewed? We're so used to controlling that experience right now. We design, we develop things knowing what the interface is going to be. But basically the way, we have to look at the writing on the wall. The future of how we consume this content is going to change dramatically very shortly. We're not that far off from being able to decide how we want to read content and how we want that display to look. We're going to control that ourselves. To some degree, this is already happening in some cases, and the desire as a user to control that display is only increasing. So this is the trend that we're going to be seeing. As I said before, right now as web designers or print designers or content creators, we essentially make that choice for the user. We decide what the content's going to look like by how we decide to lay out the web page or how we decide to lay out the print piece. But this paradigm is really shifting, and it's already happening today with services like Instapaper and Feedly, for example. Not only do services like that grab your content from different locations, they also, in some cases, allow you to change how that content is being laid out and displayed. So, just like you saw in this last video, the future interface will be probably controlled mostly by the user, not by the author or the designer. And this, this video just gives you one great example of how a lot of smart people are really thinking about the future of content. So with that, as content creators or authors, we really have to ask ourselves, what do we do to prepare for this? How do we prepare for the future of what may be happening with our information? So I'd like to start by talking a little bit about today's content management system as we see it. Right now, when we look at the content management system, it has a very specific role to us. It manages and publishes our content to our website. And typically, when we think about the CMS, we think of it as having three sort of high-level functions or roles. One is to author content, one is to publish content, and the third is, of course, to manage our content. So the way we work today as an author is we typically log into our system. We create some content based on the page that we're going to put it on or the context in which it's going to be presented, and then we publish that content to the pages on our website. So what does this look like and how does this work? If we take a look at this diagram, basically on the left-hand side we have the CMS, on the right-hand side we have our website, and then we have this magical little cloud in between the two called an API, which is this middle piece that you're seeing. And I want to spend a few minutes talking about the API, mostly because it forms a very important role, I think, in the future of how we deal with our content, but also because I think most people tend to recognize the term API and have a general idea of what it means, but I think a lot of people are still a little bit confused about what it is. So for the purposes of clarification, I pulled up the following definition from the web. API, which stands for Application Program Interface, is a language and message format used by an application program to communicate with the operating system or some other control program, such as a database management system or communications protocol. APIs are implemented by writing function calls in the program which provide the linkage to the required subroutine for execution. Thus, an API implies that a driver or program module is available in the computer to perform the operation or software must be linked into the existing program to perform the tasks. So I really took a big chance putting this slide in here because I've sort of risked, I think, putting you all to sleep or having you check out by looking at that definition. Quite frankly, I mentioned earlier on that I have a lot of years in this industry, and when I read that definition, I, quite frankly, had no idea what it meant. So I'd like to propose a new definition that I've come up with, which is a little bit more to the point. And it's basically an API is nothing more than a magic box. You ask it for something, and it gives you something back. Quite simply put, it's just something that allows communication between two systems. It allows System A to communicate with System B, and that's it. It's nothing more than this magic box. For the most part, that's really all we need to know and all we need to consider and understand to understand the importance of what it can do for us. So if we go back to our CMS diagram, in terms of this, the API, quite simply, the website asks for content, the CMS gives it to the website. That's it. That's how it works. So this is not really a new concept. This paradigm and this technology has been around for a long time. Whether you realize it or not, you see this every day. When you go to a website and you see Google Maps embedded on that website, for example, basically what's happening is that website is asking Google API for some information. Google API is sending it back in the form of maps or in the form of directions. It happens when you buy something online through a shopping cart. Typically, you get to the checkout process. You punch in your credit card information. All it does is that website asks a credit card API. Is this card good? Is this card not good? The credit card API comes back with a result. Yep, it's good. Charge it. No, it's not good. Have them enter it again. We do this with shipping, for example. You go to a website to order something. You want to see what the shipping costs are. We typically use an API that connects to UPS. Based on the information you've provided, we ask it for some rates. It gives us some rates back. So as I say, this is nothing new, and this is something that is a really great system and something we rely on every day. The issue that we really have is that oftentimes we have a lot of separate systems like this. So in this case, it's fantastic. Our website from the API gets information from our CMS. But in this particular paradigm, the only thing our CMS can do is publish information to our website. It can't publish it anywhere else. However, if we can take what's already working really well and take this architecture and extend it, I have to ask myself, what if we can start with the CMS, and take advantage of what it does best, which is manage content. Then take our API, make it public, so it would expose our content to not just our website, but to anyone else who wants it. This way now, the content within our CMS would not only be available to our website, but we could make it available to print applications, for example, printing off PDFs, other websites, not just our own, but maybe third-party websites as well. Mobile apps could be our own, could be somebody else's. And then content aggregators, so other people that want to pull in our content, feeds, listings, things like that. So basically with a good management tool, a proper content strategy, and an open public API like this, your content can then be made accessible to anyone, anywhere. So why is this important? Well, remember we discussed earlier, we looked at those different interfaces that are coming out. We talked about having separate siloed systems managing your content. This just makes it far more difficult to manage, far more difficult to maintain consistency. And, at the end of the day, makes your job much more difficult. If you could manage your content in one place and then make it available for mass distribution to multiple channels, you eliminate this problem. It also gives you the control of how your content goes out the door, which we'll talk about shortly. But ultimately, whatever interface might come along, you may not be able to control the display. You can still control the content that's getting out to those displays. So how do we do this? So a few years ago, National Public Radio, NPR, as I'm sure most of you are aware, they identified a very distinct problem they were having. They had a vast array of information or content, if you will, that was living on their website. However, they really had no way to effectively get this content out to the multiple outlets that were asking to consume it or wanting to consume it. For example, they had a mobile app, so they had separate content feeding the mobile app. They had a bunch of affiliate station sites. So these station sites, who are part of the NPR family, had their own content, but also wanted to pull in NPR's content, repurpose it. We had third-party sites that had no affiliation whatsoever, like NPR News, that, again, wanted to pull in that content for their own use. We had readers out there like Google Reader, Feedly, things of that nature. Same thing. People wanted to be able to pull that content in through those pieces. We had a bunch of mashups sort of showing up on the web that were ones like NPR Backstory that, again, wanted to access that content, display it their own way. And finally, and really interestingly enough, there are a lot of third-party app developers out there, mobile app developers, who had no affiliation with NPR whatsoever, who wanted to write their own custom apps for iPhones and for Androids that got that information. So they're basically doing the work for NPR, helping to spread their information out there. So what was the solution? So what NPR decided to do is they realized they had to redo their entire management system and how they were editing and authoring their content. Their goal was to get all their content out to all of these resources, and in order to do that, what they were going to have to do is they were going to have to create a system where they could create their content once and then publish it everywhere. So they came up with a system called COPE. Some of you may have heard of this before, some may not. Basically, COPE stands for Create Once and Publish Everywhere. So the system that they came up with allowed their content writers to manage all their content from one location. Then, by making their API partially available to the public, other content providers, as we saw before, could then access this information and display it as they saw fit. And what this really did was bring the job of content creation back to its core. The authors could focus on simply writing content. They didn't need to worry about how the content was going to lay out. They didn't need to worry about designing their content. Not knowing where the content was going to be displayed ultimately brought them back to thinking strictly about the stories they were writing and the meaning and context of that content. They didn't have to worry about display. Their philosophy was let the endpoint, whether that's a website, a mobile app, a third-party site, let them worry about the display. We'll worry about giving them good, structured content to work with. So how did NPR do this, and how could we go about doing something very similar? It starts by doing something that we call content modeling. And this has been a term that's been sort of bouncing around the industry for a little while now. And really what content modeling is it's nothing more than a scary word for organizing our content in such a way that it can be repurposed in any way to any consumers of our content, any third-party sites, mobile apps. We want to make it available for them to easily access in an organized and useful fashion. They could then focus on how they need to display it based on their restrictions or rules. If they have particular goals they're trying to achieve, or if they have real estate restrictions because of it's a mobile app, they can deal with that. So in order to be successful in content modeling, there are really three main steps that we need to follow to organize our content in a meaningful and structured fashion. The first step is to organize our content by like items. It's what we call content types. The second step is to break that content within these content types into what Karen McGrain refers to as manageable chunks. Karen is a very well-known usability architect, user experience architect in the industry, and she's coined this nice term called chunks, chunking your content. The third step we need to take is create multiple versions of each chunk as appropriate. So let's look at step one. Organizing our content into different content types. So content types are simply a matter of taking a look at all the different types of content that you're going to be producing and putting them into like groups. Some obvious ones that I'm sure you've come across and you might be thinking of right now are things like articles, bios or author bios, could be any type of person really. Events. If you're in the B2C world, it could be product information or information sheets, for example. Generally speaking, if we take a look at all of the content that we're producing, chances are most of it, if not all of it, can be broken up into groups like this. And again, I'm sure you can think of dozens more as we're just sitting here. Whether they're press releases, resources, white papers, case studies, the list goes on and on. Most of the time, almost all the content we produce can be put in these types of content types. Even if it's something as simple as an information page, that can be a content type. And then grouping our content like this essentially allows us to be very thoughtful and consistent in terms of how our content gets organized. If we think of like items always having the same information as other like items, articles always have the same information, it's just different. Once we've then grouped our content into content types, we can take a look at the second step, which is breaking those content items up into manageable chunks. So what exactly does that mean? Well, if we take a look at the information contained within any one particular content type, say an event or an article, it's usually pretty clear to see that the full content can be broken down into sets of consistent elements or consistent fields contained within that content type. So if we take a look at an article here, it's a pretty simple article, something we've seen probably a million times. And if we look at it really carefully, it's pretty easy to see that we can start to break this article up into manageable chunks or pieces. We have a title, we have a source, we have a byline, we have a last updated line as well as a little tag here, filed under social media. We have an image. We have some story highlights here on the left. This happens to have a video. And then we have the main body copy. So chances are, if you're the producer of these articles for this particular organization, every article that you write is going to have these same elements. And if they don't, then they probably should. You should examine why they don't. If for nothing more than consistency, you would like your information to have a consistent face to it and a consistent meaning to it. And in that, you should probably come up with a standard set of elements or fields that you want to contain within a particular content type. It's just a good content strategy overall. So in this case of your articles, if all your articles have these same elements to them, that would be a good thing to do. Now, when you're doing this exercise of taking a look at a particular content type and breaking it up into chunks, it's very important to be really thoughtful and do it very carefully. And the reason is because you don't just want to consider what information might show, for example, on your website. You want to think of what other elements might be pertinent to other distribution channels. So, for example, should you have an audio transcript of this article? Should you have an image caption? Should there be other supporting images? Maybe it's a good idea to have a teaser or a short description. Maybe a transcript for the video. Even though you might not be using these on the web or on your final destination of what you're writing for, others may be interested in using that information. Maybe some site that wants to consume your content and consume your video wants to have the full transcript for 508 compliance purposes, right? So be thoughtful when you're creating these content types and really think long and hard about what you might want to have around that information that could be pertinent to others. And it seems kind of obvious when we look at it this way, but in reality, typically when we're authoring content today, we tend to do it in some fashion word processing application like Microsoft Word. And what we end up with is what we see here. We simply dump all our content onto a Word document or some other text editor somewhere. And we're pretty comfortable with this, and for the most part, we try to maintain a certain level of consistency when we do this. But since there are no real rules to adhere to, there's no guidance from the system itself, it still ultimately leaves us open for the author to do as they wish. It also doesn't take into consideration, what if we have some chunks in here, some content elements that we don't want to display right now, but we want to have attached to that content for future use. Basically what we're looking at here is just a combination of text formatting, maybe some images. It's sort of all dumped into one place. It's just a bunch of stuff. And in reality, most systems aren't smart enough to break that apart in a very thoughtful way. They simply regurgitate the information that you give it. So in this case, it's garbage in, garbage out. However, if we have a system that breaks up our content as follows, just as we looked at it before when we broke it up on the visual, if it allows us to enter our information into these chunks and stores them within the system this way, it not only takes away the guesswork from the author, it also puts our content into nice, manageable pieces that other systems can then reassemble in a real thoughtful fashion. So for example, if we're writing content for articles and the end consumer happens to be a text reader, they really don't have any need to show a video. And they're only looking to show the text of the article. However, if that video is embedded within the body of the article, now we're leaving it up to them to find a way to strip that out. And that can be problematic and not always an easy thing to do. The same thing holds true for images. If we embed the images within the copy of our article, we're forcing that third-party system to pull them out. And maybe there's a good reason they don't want to use them or they don't have them a good place for them there. With a system like this, we can do things like collect an audio version, as we said before, and then that audio version can be used for a site that's simply doing podcasting. We may not use it ourselves, but if we make it available through our system and ultimately through our API, then it can be used anywhere by someone if they want to use it. Let them make that choice. Another interesting thing to point out here is that if we do organize our content into content types like this, then break the content into chunks, we really have a unique opportunity to start to relate one content type to another. So as an example, let's say we have a content type called authors. And within authors, we break that up into chunks. Author name, author title, maybe an image of the author, maybe some listings of areas of expertise, and perhaps a biography. So now, if you look at the screen in terms of how we broke out this article, notice that the byline in this screen is a select box. If we have a system that can create a relationship between the article's byline and the author content type, we can now join that data from these two items together. So in the data world, is something we call data normalization. So what that means is we have an author interface here for managing our author's data, and we can manage a particular author information from one location. So we can put the first name, last name, area of expertise, etc. in here. So now let's imagine, for example, one of the authors in our system gets married and their last name changes. So now if she happens to be an author of hundreds of articles on your website and your content isn't structured and have relatable elements like this, you're tasked with going back in and changing all those past articles to add her new last name, which can be a very painful process. However, in this scenario, because we're tying the article to the author through this relationship, we simply need to change it in one place, and then through this relationship, it automatically gets bound to this author, to these articles that this author happens to be tied to. Now let's take this even one step further. Perhaps on your website, or even another website that's consuming your information, they want to show your content a little bit differently. They want to display a list of every article that a certain author has written, or they want to group the articles by author. Because we've built this relationship and because we've structured our content, that now can be done quite easily. Otherwise, if it's all embedded into one big massive clump of information, it's just not possible. It can't be organized in that way. The best part about this is as content authors, we don't have to worry about how this happens. We leave that to the programmers to deal with. They create the systems, they create the APIs that allow these relationships to exist. You worry about the content, and then the end consumer, your website, third-party site, mobile app, they worry about the display. You simply focus on content. So I'm hoping, as you're seeing this, you're starting to see a lot of possibilities here of what you can do with this. The third step is creating multiple versions of each chunk. So what do we mean by this? Oftentimes when we're writing something, again, I'll use the article example. When we're writing something like a title, we write it, once again, with the specific context or the end medium in mind. So in the example of a web page, we generally know how much real estate we have to work with, and then we write a title that we know sort of fits into that real estate. The problem here is that if the system consuming our article doesn't, if another system consuming our article doesn't have that same amount of real estate, the title's not going to fit. And typically what happens here is truncation occurs. And the thing I hate the most, the ellipses is used, and we start chopping content up into pieces. Now most of the time this is okay, but there are certainly times when this can drastically change the meaning of your content. So for example, if we take this headline, as dreadful as it sounds, and something I certainly don't like reading every time, we see that this title has been truncated and we put the ellipses at the end. It's a pretty powerful statement with a pretty specific meaning. However, if we look at the entire title, it certainly changes the meaning quite drastically. And this is done all the time. I mean, surf the web for any length of time and you'll start noticing these ellipses turning up everywhere and content being truncated constantly. I don't personally believe this is a very good strategy to follow. And I'll use a quote by, again, Karen McGrain, who I mentioned earlier, who loves to say truncation is not a content strategy. And I really couldn't agree more. I think it's very important here to avoid that at all costs. So the problem here is if we only provide one title, we ultimately leave it up to the distribution channel to figure out what they need to do with it if they can't fit it into their display. However, if we give that final channel a few options, then we put ourselves in a position to choose something that works best for them. So what do we mean by this? Usually when I come up with this slide, I start to get all the moans and groans because we're talking about creating multiple versions of a title, for example. And when this happens, the most common thing is, well, now you're just giving me more work to do. Now I have to write 3 titles instead of 1. But let me point out a couple things. First is, the fact is, journalists have done this for years. In newspaper and in print, they've always had to come up with different headline lengths for various reasons. So the same ones we're talking about today. Sometimes it's going to be a headline on the front page. Sometimes you might have a related article section somewhere else. This is a pretty common practice, but more so for practicality purposes. So let's say you're the author of the content in your organization, and you have to write these articles, and the person in charge of your website says, well, on the home page we show the top 3 articles that were just most recently posted. And we don't have a lot of space. We have a small bucket on the home page. So you have to limit your title to, say 80 characters. So you have 2 choices. Either write a meaningful title that's maybe longer, 120, 130 characters, and then have it get truncated or chopped off on that home page, or struggle to write a shorter one that, okay, great, it works on the home page, but now maybe it isn't the best thing you could have done for a circumstance when you do have more real estate, say on the actual articles page. This is something we deal with all the time. For example, for those of you on Twitter dealing with that 140 character limit, who among us hasn't struggled to try to get our meaning across 140 characters? It really puts you in a position to have very little flexibility. However, if you create multiple titles, a short one, a medium one, and a long one, you can then make sure the meaning stays the same across all 3. And then ultimately, the content consumer on the other end, the interface that's going to show this information, can make a thoughtful choice and choose the one that works best for them. Another great example is images. The same thing could be done here. Perhaps you're writing a white paper and you're being told that you have to use a low-res image because the copy is going to be on the mobile site or the responsive site, and you have to really consider people's bandwidth. But what if you also want that same content to produce a nice branded PDF of that white paper with a really nice high-res image in it, good for print? If you only have a choice of doing a low-res image, the white paper is not going to look good. Or if you put only a high-res image on there, you're going to have bandwidth issues with your mobile site. So making 3 images, which is very easy to do, 3 different resolutions, really helps to solve some of that problem. The same could be done if we want to do different aspects of images. A horizontal, a vertical, square one, for example. The thing is, we have to remember that the fact is, whether we like it or not, people and systems are going to take our content and display it the way they want to anyway. And this is already being done. For those of you who are familiar with Instapaper, Instapaper is an application that allows you to install it on your toolbar of your browser. And then when you're browsing the web, you see an article or a web page that you like, you click that button on the toolbar, and it saves it for future viewing on their application. So in the case of this particular article here, I happened to go to this one, and I then saved it to my Instapaper. And this is what it looks like. So at first glance, they look pretty close to the same thing, but if you look a little bit closer, you'll see a few small differences. You'll notice, for example, the byline has changed a little bit. Nothing major. The content has pretty much remained the same. Oh, and Instapaper just converts it to an image. Okay, not the worst thing. Notice the caption under the image on the original article. Now suddenly that becomes part of the article, which may throw context off, may not. Story highlights on the left in the article now become sort of the lead piece of my article. In this particular case, again, not the worst thing because it is relevant to have your highlights first, but what if this copy were something else? What if this were related articles? Point is that Instapaper is making its own decisions, and they're taking liberty in terms of how to get to display your content. Most of the time they get it right. Most of the time these other sources do it, but sometimes they don't. Google does this all the time. Whether we realize it or not, I'm sure we're all used to it, but when we do a search on Google, it scrapes your site and it grabs the information that it feels will be relevant. You can control this to some degree with your metadata, but if you don't, it makes its own assumptions. You'll notice in search results number 2, 4, and 5 here, we have the dreaded ellipsis again. Out it comes. So they're making decisions of how to present our content. Facebook does the same thing. Any of you tried to post a link on your Facebook account, automatically you put that link in there and suddenly Facebook goes over and it grabs a title, it grabs an image, grabs some other information. Again, you can partially control this through what Facebook calls open graph tags. In this case, it works out pretty nicely. It's pretty relevant. The image is good. The title is good. The little teaser is good. It's all good relevant information. But here's a situation where it's not so good. So I went and pulled this article down this morning. And as you can see, the image, it just took the top image and it just chopped it up, made it fit. If we look at the little description underneath the title, it puts the dreaded ellipses in there. It's probably one of the most important places in the article. The duo danced the contemporary number to the song Titanium, earning ... So I'm left not knowing that information. So, basically, as we saw, as we can see in things like this, that these systems, as they get smarter, are going to need to have a good way to be able to pull our content in a thoughtful manner. So why not organize our content in a way that makes it easier for them? Let's not have them have to make assumptions. Let's create good structured content, chunked content with an open API that lets them pull that data in. What I'm looking at here is what I hope my living room will look like in 2 or 3 years. This is really where I see the future of interfaces. My control, my wall, my font, my display, however I want to look at things. This is where things are going. Ultimately, I'm going to be able to decide what I want to see and how I see it. And as content producers, we need to stop thinking about designing our content and concentrate more on structuring and writing our content for reuse on displays like this. We're already losing control of our interfaces and our displays. What we can control, however, is our messaging and how we organize our content to maintain meaning. That we'll always have control over. I think Ben Franklin probably said it best. I love this quote. It's certainly very pertinent to the digital landscape of today and tomorrow. And that's basically when you finish changing, you're finished. So, the final thought here I want to leave you with is don't fear the future. Be excited about it. A lot of really cool things are coming out. We may fear what this is going to do to our content, but in reality, it's doing us a great favor. It's allowing our content to get out to so many places we never imagined before. Our message can go everywhere now. So, let's not fear that. Let's really be excited about it. We live in super exciting times when it comes to technology, and something we should really be happy with. So with that, I'd like to open up to any questions that any of you have. I think we have about 10 minutes here. Okay, so the first question we have is, more often than not, the people who are authoring our content are not the same people that enter it into our content management system. Any suggestions for how we set up our authors to write content in a more consistently structured fashion? Yeah, that's a really good question. A lot of times, this is a pretty common structure, I think, where organizations have multiple content authors, and they may be passing their information on to ultimately to the webmaster or someone else who's managing the CMS. There are a couple things you can do to help this process. Once you've determined sort of the structure of your content and the chunks of your content type, there's a tool, for example, that we use on the web called Gather Content, and it allows authors to be able to simply store and manage content for later reuse on, for example, into a CMS, for example. And it allows you to chunk your content like this and create these content types. And it's a really great tool for the authors to put all that information in there, and then that information can be exported out in a variety of formats to be then imported into a CMS system. Or it can simply be taken by the webmaster from there and then put directly into the CMS article at a time. It's got some nice things like workflow in there and some good rules around it. Other things that we advise people to do, tool like that, if they still want to use traditional Word documents, are create what are used to be called in the print world page tables. And this is nothing more than really a Word document template, if you will, where these fields or chunks are separated out in the Word document, and they give a few rules to the author. So the author knows to put in a short title, medium title, long title, and they're broken out by the fields or by the template of the Word document itself. And if you have something like that, at least everyone's writing to the same standard and the same consistency, and then that makes it easier for the person dealing with the content management system to take that information and put it in the appropriate places. Next question we have is, you mentioned opening up your content to the public through an API. Wouldn't this expose all your information to anyone? Yeah, certainly it would if you allowed all your information out. Again, this is where we leave it to the developers. Your API can be as public or as private as you want, or somewhere in between. Oftentimes, there's only certain information you're going to allow out through your API. Other times, you're not going to make it available to all the public, but only the people that you have relationships with. So in the case of NPR, they decide to let their affiliate sites consume that information. Other apps that they've done, that they had contacted them and had been given permission to use that information could. So really, this is more of a technology question where you can open it as wide open as you want or limit it as much as you want. Next question we have here is, how detailed do I need to be when breaking my content into chunks? Is there some sort of best practice around knowing how specific each section should be, or what level of detail I need to achieve with each segment? That's a great question. A lot of it really focuses on a few things. A lot of it is on common sense. It's oftentimes an exercise between a lot of people. Depends a little bit on your system and what your system can support. So it might be a conversation between yourselves, other authors, as well as your development team to understand what your system can support. And in doing that, it's sort of more of a conversation. We looked at the article and we sort of took a look at what sort of made sense and how we could break things up. And it's usually pretty quick and easy to figure out what those things can be. Another question we have is, what CMS are geared towards this type of approach? Also, how does XML publishing fit into this approach? Again, another great question. So most CMSs today, if not doing this to some capacity, are all moving towards this model because they all recognize just the inherent abilities in being able to create related content and repurposable content. So, without going through a list of all the ones that are out there, it's more something that you want to do your own due diligence on and take a look at and see if they have those capabilities or are soon to be offering them. But in terms of XML publishing and how that fits this approach, sometimes it fits very well. Depending on how your API is structured, if your content is structured very well, you can publish it out to an XML format, and that does make it very consumable by third parties, and it does make it easy for them to integrate into your system. I'm assuming that's what you mean by that question, and hopefully I've answered that properly. If not, of course, you can always resubmit, and we'll follow up on that. Let's see here. We've got still a few more minutes. So I'm going to field another question that just came in, which is, let's see, my company is currently considering a complete overhaul of our website. If we do decide to redesign our site, when should the content model be established? Follow-up, does it impact the IA and design process of creating websites, or is it more of a maintenance task? So a couple things here. The content model should probably be established early on because this really does aid in the redesign of the website. When you're looking at, a lot of people refer to this as content first before even starting the project, going on to establishing what your content should look like before doing design and IA, and I agree with this. I agree with this approach. It's generally a good one. It allows the designers and the IA folks to really understand what your content actually looks like. So establishing this content model early on is a very good thing. You don't have to have it 100% right in order to start the design IA process, but as close as you can get it just gives everybody some idea on the display side of what to do with your stuff. Next question we have here is, where does metadata fit in? So metadata fits in a lot of ways. Metadata is helpful to any third-party consumption source that uses it. So for example, Google will use your metadata in your search results. So having, and from the content model, that can be a part of your content model itself, a part of your content type. So having things like a meta title, meta description, meta keywords can all be part of that model. And then putting that information in there, once again, as we said before, your website might use it, and that's great, because now your website can use it as metadata. But a third-party site doesn't need to use it, so they'll just ignore it. They won't necessarily use it. But it's definitely very helpful from a search engine perspective. I mentioned earlier, I showed an example of Facebook. Facebook has their own metadata structure. It's called Open Graph Tags. And that allows you to, again, control what the title is that shows up when someone posts your link. It controls the image that shows up, and it controls the description, as well as the URL. So again, those can all be pulled from that, from those chunks or from that content type. So definitely a very important part, but a very interesting point, because metadata only pertains to the website. It doesn't pertain, for example, to print or to other mediums. So it goes back to our original conversation about creating a content model that's open enough and flexible enough to work across all different types of mediums, including web. One more we have here. Seems like this strategy would fit in perfectly with responsive design. Have you had any experiences or advice around that? Yeah, I mean, I think the strategy helps with everything, regardless of whether it's responsive design or not. But in the case of responsive design, it certainly can help because it can allow the display, if you will, the endpoint, to have a few choices in terms of how they display the data. Again, if we get into challenges with things like real estate and how we want to show, the short title versus the long title, a low-res image versus a high-res image, then your systems at least have a choice in terms of what they do. And if your programmers can program the system in such a way, they can use those different chunks or different data elements based on the fact that it's now a mobile device consuming that content. So it definitely can help, but it's really certainly not restricted to that. It's really across the board. So I think that's, I don't see any more questions coming through. I think that's it. Again, I'd like to thank you all for attending today, and thank you to the folks at Percussion, and thank you, Alexis. And I hope you all have a great day.